My name is Haytham Abu Shaban, an international development consultant. I currently work for the World Bank in Washington, D.C., and I serve as the Director of Finance at the Harvard Alumni Global Development. I am honored to moderate this discussion today. Before we begin, would like to go over some housekeeping to be mindful throughout the session. So audience members will have the opportunity to ask questions towards the end of the program. Also, feel free to post your questions in the Q&A box for any questions you may have. Also, you are welcome to engage with the event's participants using the same chat box or the chat box. Please note that this session is being recorded and will be available to view after the event. We'll share the details as well after the meeting, the recording, and we will share via email. Also, would like to have you connected with us on our group on social media, the website. We'll share the details as well for future events, workshops for the remainder of the year. So can we dive in now? Would like to learn more about the audience. If you haven't yet done it, could you share with us where are you joining from? And we'll give you like a minute to share where you should joining.
Great to see other communication professionals here like Lisa. Welcome, Lisa.
And if you would like to answer a different question as an icebreaker, what inspires you to be part of the global development or international development? So you could answer both at the same time.
Great question. We've got New York, we've got Seattle, Dubai, where it's evening, Seattle, where it's morning, Anula in Greece, Kalispera, Tikanete. Greek is my favorite language. Let's see who else is joining.
Steny Yasu.
Yasu.
Steny Yasu.
Yasu Tikanis.
Kalane.
We have Zaina with us, so maybe as people answering the icebreaker. So I'd like to hand it over to Zaina Adamu, who's the president at Hagdi, for a brief remarks.
Sure. Thank you, Haytham. Thank you, Allison, for being here. I am actually, I'm based in Washington, D.C., but I'm here in New York for the United Nations General Assembly, and I am actually heading ready to speak myself at a sideline event for the activities here. And Haytham said, no, we've got to have you here. And I said, you don't even have to say it twice. I will be here. I read your work, Allison, and I thought you just do phenomenal work. And I'm so honored and privileged to have you here with us. I'm sure we're going to learn so much from you. And just very quickly to our audience, I want to thank you all for joining us. For those of you who are new to the organization, Harvard Alumni for Global Development began in 2013. And what we do is we bring about Harvard alumni from all of the schools who have a shared interest in helping constituents, governments, policymakers in developing countries and emerging markets. And so we've been around for over 10 years now. We have a membership of over 1,500 people spanning over 26 countries across all of the continents. And it's just been such a phenomenal experience. Being with Hagdi, meeting the members. I encourage each and every one of you who are Harvard alumni to please join our networks, and we'll put some more information in the chat on how you can join our organization. Thank you again to Haytham for organizing this, and for Allison for being here, and for Karen for your support. Karen is our vice president. She's done such great work for us. So thank you all, and I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zaina. Now it's my honor to introduce our guest, Ms. Allison Shapira. Ms. Shapira is the trusted advisor behind some of the world's most influential voices. She is a former opera singer who went from stage presence to executive presence for over 20 years. She has some of the world's most influential organizations, working with leaders from prime ministers to CEOs. Today, she teaches leaders how to speak with confidence, authenticity, helping them harness AI to elevate their voice without losing a human connection. Allison also teaches at the Harvard Kennedy School as an adjunct lecturer and has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, and Harvard Business Review. She's the author of 3 books, including Washington Post bestseller Speak with Impact and How to Command the Room and Influence Others, a companion guide, Speak with Impact Virtually, and the forthcoming AI for Authentic Leader this fall. So look for it on Amazon. One of the proudest moments was singing the national anthem at Fenway Park for Boston Red Sox. Ms. Shapira, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Haitham. What a treat to be with you and to see everyone from all around the world on this call. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you again. I'd like to start from the beginning and ask, how did you go from studying opera and becoming a successful entrepreneur and Harvard lecturer?
Growing up, all I wanted to do was be an opera singer. That was my singular focus growing up. And as I started to get into the field of opera, I realized it was very political, and that was not a place where I expected politics to play a role. But I found myself disillusioned by the politics of opera and wound up leaving. And in my first job out of college, I had to write speeches for our boss, for the organization, and realized I'd have to give speeches on behalf of my organization. And I had no idea how to do that. So I joined Toastmasters and learned about public speaking and realized I already knew public speaking because of my background as a singer. I could use breathing to calm my nerves. I was comfortable on stage. I had studied 4 different languages in college, 3 of them on the same day. On Wednesday, I had Italian, German, and Greek on the same day. And so I'd had this global mindset that I'd developed. And the only thing I had to learn was messaging and speech writing, because opera singers don't write their own material. We're pretty much delivering other people's material. So I had to learn messaging, persuasion, and influence, which was a fairly heavy lift to add to the mix. Once I did, I realized not only was I a good speaker, I was an even better coach, because as singers, we develop this very nuanced eye and ear for how people deliver a message. And that made me very good at guiding others in how to deliver that message. And the way I got to Harvard was I was interviewing for a program manager role that had nothing to do with public speaking, but I had a side business. I'd started teaching public speaking, and the person interviewing me was David Gergen, who very unfortunately passed recently. And he was interviewing me for this job that had nothing to do with public speaking, but he looked at my resume and he said, Toastmasters, public speaking. You know, I teach a course called The Arts of Communication. Maybe you'd like to help me as a faculty teaching aide for that course. And I took a deep breath and said, I would be happy to do that. And now, after that, it's probably 12 years, more than 12 years after that experience, I teach his course, The Arts of Communication, at the Kennedy School. So that's how all of that happened. And then in the meantime, launching my own company doing this as well.
Yeah, what I hear from you, that you write speeches for others, or sometimes you give the speech or talk. So this brings me to the second question, which is, like, as you coach leaders at the highest levels, whether in government or business, what are the common challenges that you see most experienced leaders face when it comes to communication or preparing for a speech or even giving a speech?
That's right. And there's so many issues when you look at delivering a message. I actually stopped writing speeches for people as a service. It was one of my first jobs, but I realized that's not where my passion was. My passion was and is helping leaders bring out their authentic voice and calm their nerves to bring out their best self. And I find even at the highest levels of business and government, people still struggle with showing who they are. We put these layers on ourselves that we think people expect. And in some ways they do. And we do have to be very cognizant of how we want to come across. But my goal when I work with leaders is to first start with how do they communicate with themselves? What's the story they're telling themselves? And the way they communicate with themselves will then be reflected in the way they communicate externally. So we take a very inside out approach. And that's a very, I would say, personal conversation to have with a senior leader, usually one-on-one or with a senior communication director present as well. And I really admire, or not admire, but I appreciate the fact that I can work with someone, not just on their public image, but on their personal sense of self that then affects their public image.
Nice. So I remember when I did the course with Professor Marie Danziger almost 7 years ago, that in order to give a talk or a speech, you need to listen. So this brings me to the second question is, what are the competencies that leaders need to communicate effectively? Is it about a preparation, training, or natural? It comes as they were born with it. Could you tell us more about competencies?
Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned, are they born with it? Because I believe public speaking specifically is a skill and not a talent. Some people might naturally be more comfortable being the center of attention. Some people might be more extroverted and they naturally like to talk. It doesn't mean they're good at it. It just means they like to talk. So we learn the skills of communication by looking at the discipline of building this skill. Just as if you were going to do a push-up for the first time, nobody's naturally knows how to do a push-up. You have to teach them how to do that. So I build those muscles and that discipline. And there's so much. I mean, I teach a 6-week course on these core competencies. But what I've done is I've distilled the components, the foundational components, into 3 components, which I call the ACE model of leadership communication. And I've taught these strategies all around the world. This is not simply an American-centric view of how to communicate. Now, in every country, we adapt it differently. It means we express it differently. However, I still have seen these 3 components as critical, and I'll walk you through each one. And then later on, if we have time, I'll give you some exercises to actually practice them. So ACE, first and foremost, stands for authenticity, then clarity, and then energy. And when I say authenticity, I don't just mean this Americanized version of bring your whole self to work, which is something we talk a lot about in the US. I actually refer to it as strategic authenticity. And if you think about a Venn diagram, you've got your authentic self in one circle. And then on the other circle, you have what's effective in your context. Your context could be the sector you work in. It could be the company you work for. Some organizations, it's so broad, it depends on what floor you're working on. That's how specific it is. And strategic authenticity is the overlap between the two, where we find what's authentic to us and what's effective for this audience, for this situation. And there's a process I guide people through in order to achieve that level of authenticity, because it's that authenticity that builds trust with our audiences. The second component, C, stands for clarity, which means how can I take everything in my head, all that subject matter expertise that I learned at the Kennedy School and have developed in my work in the field? And how do I put it into language that others can see and take action on? And the context you're working in, private sector, public sector, the region you're working in will determine through your strategic authenticity what clarity looks like for that audience. But it's recognizing that what we have in our head is usually not what our audience needs to hear. We have to be able to translate it into language that other people can see and take action on. And that's especially difficult right now because many of us got to where we are by being subject matter experts and having all the information, which means we're 100% certain. But I believe we're entering an era where we'll never have 100% certainty about information ever again. And so if our sense of confidence comes from having all the information, well, that confidence is going to go out the window and it's never going to come back. So how can we learn to confidently speak about the uncertainty as a way to demonstrate to people the complexity of the situation, but also give them hope about how we're approaching it and the process we're using to get the information that we need? And then the third component of the ACE model, E, stands for energy. And energy recognizes that you, as the senior most leader, your energy affects the energy of everyone else in that room or even on this call. It happens virtually and in person. So I want leaders to be intentional about the energy that they're using when they speak, because usually we spend all of our time focused on the message. What do I want to say? What do I want people to hear? But it's all about the words. We have communications, speechwriters, and comms officers helping us with the words. But it's our job as speakers and as leaders to lift the words off the page and not just into the ears of audiences, but into their hearts and minds as well. And the way we do that is by bringing out our best energy. This isn't about going from an introvert to an extrovert. It's about tapping into your energy when you're at your best and giving yourself permission to share it so that you can ensure your message lands with your audience.
Yeah, thank you so much. Actually, now you ended with the energy, brings me to the new book, AI for Authentic Leader, which explores the intersection between technology and communication. So how can leaders harness AI without losing human connection?
I'm so glad you asked that question. And I'm really excited about this new book, AI for the Authentic Leader, How to Communicate More Effectively Without Losing Your Humanity. And that comes out next week, October 1st. It just became available for pre-order. So it's something that's very much on my mind right now. And I wrote the book not full of case studies of leaders using AI. I wrote the book because I don't see enough leaders using AI effectively. And at the individual level, right now, organizations, countries are all looking at how do we roll out AI across our enterprise or our country as a way of increasing efficiency. I look at AI use on the individual level and I want leaders to ask themselves, how can I use AI to be a better leader, a more effective leader, and a more authentic leader? Can AI prompt me to be more authentic, not less? I believe you can. And that's what I write about in the book. Can you use it just to outsource your leadership? Sure. I mean, you can use it in a good way and you can use it in a negative way. My goal in writing the book is to show people how they can use AI to be even truer to their values than before. And then I also discuss some risks and some ethical challenges that every leader needs to navigate on an individual level as they prepare to guide their organizations and their countries through this pivotal time that we're going through in human history.
Yeah, I would like to, if you could elaborate more on how can leaders use AI to enhance, not to replace authenticity, if you could like elaborate on this.
Sure. I'll give you a few examples from the book.
Please.
And I'll start with the easiest way that I write about in the book. And that's looking at how AI can find and help reflect back to you the jargon that you're using. So Every organization has its own jargon and acronyms and corporate or bureaucratic speak that we use without even thinking about it. And I'll never forget coaching a woman who worked for UNICEF, and she was trying to raise money from individual donors. And she kept saying the phrase, "We're repatriating youth combatants into their target environment," or something like that. And I stopped her and I said, "What does that mean?" And she said, "Well, basically, we're sending child soldiers home to their families." And it was through that dialogue that she realized the language she had been using was for the Home Office to approve the budget. But that's not what gets individual donors to give. And so we had to translate her language to more powerful, more authentic language that would then inspire people to give money. So that's something I, as a human, as an experienced professional in this industry, helped her with. We can also use AI when we're unable to work with humans through this process and put in a message and say, find the jargon. Here's my target audience. Here's a description of who I'm speaking to and what I want them to do. And we can get really specific, whether it's personality style, Myers-Briggs assessment, or other demographics we have about their background. Here's my message. First, help me identify the jargon. Second, help me reword this in a way that's more aligned with my values. And that's still something that these AI tools are evolving to do, because I actually asked the AI tool I used to help me do that in the book. And it was very good at helping me find the jargon in my language. It was terrible at helping me reword it because it was using pre-populated language from its data set, not pre-populated, but generative words from its data set. So we're still evolving in how the AI can help us reword it. But I talk about in the book how we can train AI tools to reflect our voice and to reflect our values, and then remind us of those values when we're crafting a message, a difficult message that makes us uncomfortable. The AI can remind us who we aspire to be when we're at our best and prompt us to show it even when we're at our worst. And those are some of the use cases that I want leaders to be aware of, because the AI then becomes a companion guide to remind you, always available when you need it, that you want to be your best in every situation.
This brings me, thank you. This brings me to a different question on like people work in development, in governments. There is cut on budgets. Some CEOs or presidents, they have to deliver sad messages, bad messages that impacts people's lives. So what advice would you give leaders and the recipients of these messages?
In terms of using AI in that process?
In general, if you like.
Mm-hmm. So those are two areas, because there's how do we use AI in order to deliver a difficult message? I'll be happy to talk about that. Stepping back from the topic of AI, how do we deliver these very difficult messages about whether it's about layoffs or budget cuts or any of the issues, any of the multiple issues about which we have to have difficult conversations? And a few different ways in which I like to advise leaders to think about this is to first see if you can acknowledge what's on people's minds already. If you have difficult news and you start out in a cheery way, but everyone's worried about the difficult news, they're not listening to what you're saying. So how can we demonstrate we understand what's on their mind? We understand how they may be feeling. And when I work with leaders who work in large organizations where they have to deliver a message that they don't agree with, then this is a way for them to acknowledge how they might be feeling, but aren't allowed to say, because you can't say, here's the message, we all have to do it, I don't agree with it. Then you lose the trust of your senior leadership. But if you have to deliver this message and you say, now, I know how some of you may be feeling. If I were in your shoes, I'd be thinking A, B, and C. And you'd be right to feel that way. Here's why what we're doing is important. So what I've just done is I've shared what I'm actually thinking, but can't politically share with my audience, but I've still ensured those points are being listed. So that's one way in which I advise leaders to deliver difficult messages. And sometimes it's not about delivering the perfect message. It's about making space for people to raise their concerns, to share their thoughts. And I wrote an article about this a few months ago when the CEO of the company Fiverr spoke about a specific issue. So he runs a company that connects businesses with freelance consultants to book people for their freelance services, whether it's web design or other services. And he sent an email to the entire company saying, AI is coming for your job, and it's probably coming for mine as well. But what he didn't do, he didn't necessarily reassure them. He said, I want to hear from you. On Tuesday, I'm going to be sitting in the conference room for 3 hours. Just come talk to me. And he created a space for people to come and share their concerns and share their questions. And as a result, people felt heard. They felt acknowledged. They felt listened to. And so his job then became the facilitator of the conversation. Are there difficult cuts that will need to be made? Probably. But what he was doing was giving people a space to speak up and share their concerns. And so what I'll do sometimes with a leader who wants help is I'll say, let's not work on the perfect speech. Let's work on the perfect conversation starter. Let's work on a 1-minute opening statement that invites people to speak up and share their concerns. And then we have this productive period of conversation, thinking about what Ron Heifetz at the Kennedy School would talk about, controlling the temperature in the room. And then at the end, moving towards some sort of resolution where there's greater buy-in, because sometimes you get even better ideas from the people on the ground than you would in your big office with your own leadership team. So those are some of the many ways in which I help leaders with difficult messages, because it's such a viscerally challenging issue to address. And it only happens more and more. The more senior we become in our career, the more we're the ones having those difficult conversations or making those difficult decisions and then having to communicate them.
Yeah, now we would like to ask about something about leadership style. Like, you've been working almost 20 years advising most influential voices. What is the
22 years.
Okay, that's even more experience. What is the most surprising lessons that you've learned about leadership and leaders while you work with CEOs, public sector, NGOs, you name it?
One of the biggest surprises is that so many people are afraid of public speaking. It doesn't matter what country I am in, what language I'm speaking, the level of seniority of the person I'm speaking to. So many people will say, I'm terrified of public speaking. I hate it. Can I just delegate it to someone else on my team? No, a lot of people have, especially more senior leaders, have a lot of experience with it. They've learned it on the job. It doesn't mean they're comfortable with it or they like it necessarily. So I'm always amazed, because the work that I do with people all around the world shows how fundamentally similar we all are. As humans, we all feel pride, we feel joy, we feel anger. And so those human emotions come up in us as we prepare to deliver a message. And fear is a universal human emotion. So everyone, even at the most senior levels of leadership, still feels some degree of fear or nervousness about themselves individually being on stage with all eyes on them, delivering a difficult message that nobody wants to hear, but that needs to be said. That is a difficult challenge. And it shouldn't surprise me that people are still nervous about it, but they are.
this brings me to another question, which, like you are an opera singer, you were starting out. A piece of advice for us, most of us maybe mid-careers, working in philanthropy, international development, public sector. What advice would you give our audience and those who will watch afterwards? Maybe if I want to break down the question, is there like something that we could do to train ourselves, become better speakers, or delivering speeches, or even communicating with our colleagues, our senior management? What advice would you have for us?
Certainly a lot of advice, more than we have time for on this call today, because I'm also excited to take questions. Why don't I give you some techniques that everyone here can use that I have found to be extremely helpful. And it's also based on how I define public speaking, because so often people think of public speaking as what you do before the UN General Assembly, and that's one form of public speaking. But I define it as anytime you speak with one person or more, with some purpose or goal. So it happens every single day in a one-on-one meeting, in a small group setting, and then on a large stage. So as I think about what are the strategies we need to speak more effectively, I'm looking at that broad application of using our voice in the active leadership. And so in order to tap into our authenticity, our strategic authenticity, which I mentioned as part of my ACE model, I go back to our values, because I define authenticity. There are many ways to define it. I define it as speaking and acting in a way that's in alignment with your values. And one of the ways in which you tap into those values is before a speech, before a meeting, before a networking event, ask yourself one profound question. And that question is, why you? And why you doesn't mean where did you go to school, how many years of experience do you have, what's your title. Those are external validators, what Professor Heifetz would call formal authority. When I ask why you, what I mean is, why do you care about the work you do, about the people you represent, and about the impact you want to have? And it's a two-part question. Why do you care? And when was a moment in your life that made you care? Was it something that happened in childhood? Was it something that happened during the pandemic when you saw everyone come together to help one another? What is one moment? And it can change in every situation. But when you answer that two-part question, a few different things happen. There are a few different benefits that come from it. First is you remind yourself that your right to speak doesn't come from anyone else. It comes from within. It comes from why you care about the impact you want to have. And for those who don't want to be the center of attention, don't worry, you're not. Your message is the center of attention. So it builds your confidence from the inside out. The second benefit is that it helps you find language that's genuine and authentic. Nobody answers why you with to increase shareholder value. It's deeper than that. So we find language that's authentic. And then the third use of that why you statement is to bond with the people around you. Because when you as a leader share your motivation around why you do what you do, then you give others permission to share their motivation and you connect on a much deeper level. And I'll never forget working with a political party in the country of Mauritius. And we went around the room and I had each member of that party share their why you statement. And it turns out they had never shared their motivation with each other. They just assumed we're all in it for the same reason. And it was through the exercise of sharing deeply personal motivations with one another that they realized how aligned they are on their mission, which helped them become more aligned on their messaging as well. And it became a wonderful trust building exercise. So that's one exercise that I would recommend for anyone to ask themselves and to share with their teams and their organizations. And if people want to put their YU into the chat, a few sentences about their YU, I'd also love to see those as well. And I'm sure others would too.
Yeah, please engage with us. We're coming almost to the last question. Might be a bit lengthy, but this is, I promise you, the last question. Then we'll turn it to you. It's a personal question that pertains to your career. If you ever faced a setback, how did you overcome it? And what is one of the proudest moments in your career that you felt that, oh, I did this, I trained enough, or I delivered to this important message or important value, like you mentioned, value to this organization, or without even naming it. So setbacks, so how did you overcome it? And one of the proudest
setbacks.
moments.
It's hard to find just one setback because there have been a lot of setbacks, and it's easy. This is a job that looks very glamorous from the outside, but is actually takes a lot of work, and it takes every part of you. I mean, we don't just show up, teach, and go home. And I'm sure with everyone here, the work you do, it's not just the work you do. For me, at least, it's who I am. And so it takes every part of me, and then I give it every part of me as well. And I would say one of the biggest challenges that I faced was during COVID, as probably many of you did. We lost all of our revenue as a company within the span of 2 months. And I had just hired 2 new full-time employees. I had lured them away from large companies and asked them to take the risk to come work for a small business owner to really have an impact. And then they join, and I'm giving them benefits and health insurance, which in the US is a really big deal for a small business, and 401k, retirement. And then COVID hits, and we lose all of our contracts for the year. And it was really challenging. And I made the commitment I wasn't going to let anyone go. You know, we put everyone to work using their skills however they could, and we immediately pivoted from in-person training and coaching to virtual. And it was my job to keep everyone motivated and emotionally supported during that time. And not only did we end the year at the same revenue level that we'd achieved last year, but the following year was our best year ever because of these new virtual products and services. And so what the biggest setback, which was losing everything that was going to keep us going and profitable to serve more people, then became one of my proudest moments, which was not letting anyone go during that time, even though their paychecks were coming out of my personal account as opposed to our business account. And so I'm really proud that I feel like I did the right thing for them because they had just taken this big risk to come work for me.
Thank you so much. Now we turn it to the audience. I believe we received some questions. We have a question now on, and feel free to post more questions. So there is a question about gender differences. So women are often reported to face imposter syndrome more, and lower confidence could hinder performance. How would you like to answer this?
That's such an important question. Thank you. It is a question that comes up a lot. And I've worked with a lot of women's groups as well, all around the world. It's interesting because from my experience, I find women are more likely to share feelings of imposter syndrome. I hear a lot of men share them as well, but they share them to me directly, not in front of a group. So there's this willingness to be open about it that I find women are more likely to share that in my experience. What I find is, and there's really interesting research that when we think when we consider a stereotype that we know negatively affects us, it distracts us and reduces our mental capacity, which makes us more likely to validate the stereotype to begin with. So it's called stereotype threat. And if you tell women in this study, we tell women aren't as good as men on a test, then that will stick in their head and distract them and actually reduce their performance on the test, not because they're not as good, but because they're distracted and trying not to validate the stereotype, which reduces their focus on the test. So this concept, this researcher and stereotype threat is really fascinating. And what my goal is to go back to what builds our confidence, regardless of who you are. And what can I do to help you build your confidence from within? And that's what the why you statement is intended to do. Because I find this lack of confidence isn't as much gender related as it is about our perceived status within a group. If we perceive that we have a lack of status within the group, so we're more junior with a more senior audience, then I see these challenges come up. Now, in many situations, women do have less status in a group, so they're related, but I see a lot in terms of status as well as gender.
Yeah, thank you. So we'll have another one on what's the best way to start working on my public speaking skills in everyday conversations, starting from tomorrow.
Starting from tomorrow. Okay. Tomorrow, I'd like you to look at all your meetings for the day, and I'd like you to answer the question, why do you care, as it relates to every meeting. And think strategically about what you might want to share during those meetings. Like, who's your audience? What do you want them to do? Why do you care? Why you? And then start to prepare some bullet points that you could speak from. I'm not saying you're scripting questions in advance. I'm saying you're taking some strategic time at the beginning of your day to be thoughtful and intentional about what you want to happen in every meeting and how you're going to come across. And then when you speak, there's a particular technique I teach called speaking with intention, which is when we focus all of our energy physically on what we say. So instead of saying, hi, my name is Allison Shapira, if I speak with 100% intention, I'm going to focus all of my energy and I'll say, good morning, my name is Allison Shapira. And it slows me down and makes my language more powerful. So I would think about both that strategic preparation and then in the moment, how speaking with intention can make us come across in a more powerful way. Those are two of many different tools I would recommend. And the book Speak with Impact has a whole manual for building your public speaking skills every day.
Okay, how about scripting the speech? What advice do you recommend it? Do you advise some techniques, tactics as we prepare for a speech? What would you advise?
That's a common question. Do I write a script, or do I write bullet points, or do I just improvise? And what I recommend is, and it's based on how important the speech is and how comfortable you are with the material. So I'll answer as if it's a situation where it's a very important situation in front of a lot of high profile stakeholders, and it's not a topic you've spoken about a lot. Then what I do is I start by scripting it out using one of a few different structures that I teach. Then I read it out loud to make sure it sounds good for the ear as opposed to the eye. I'm pointing, here we go, ear versus eye, because I can always tell who's writing something, and they're really good at writing articles because they use long, elaborate sentences, whereas public speaking is about shorter sentences, clearer words that are easier to pronounce. So you write the speech out, read it out loud, make sure it feels good to pronounce. Then you reduce it to bullet points so that each paragraph is one bullet point. maybe 2. And bullet points are a collection of words, not full sentences, very large font. Sometimes they're all capitals. And so the act of reducing the speech from a script to bullet points also helps you remember it more effectively. Then practice the speech from those bullet points, and then bring the bullet points with you to the event. Even in my keynote speeches, which I've given hundreds of times, I have a small table on the side, not the lectern, but I have a small table relatively close to between the middle and the side of the room where my notes are resting. And if I'm walking around on stage and I forget where I'm going next, I nod thoughtfully and I walk towards the table, and I might take a strategic sip of water. Then I glance down at my notes, and then I say, let's move on to my third point. And I've given myself time. I even recorded a video on this. It's the strategic sip of water tactic. And it's recognizing I'm able to control or utilize my full body and mind when I'm on stage by setting up the dynamics so that I can do what I need to do. I'm not forcing myself to memorize it. I'm not pushing myself into an uncomfortable situation. I'm controlling all the factors I can control to make sure I have what I need. It's not dependent on a teleprompter. It's not dependent on a screen, which may or may not work. It's my notes are here and available, but I'm not wedded to them. I have them and I'm in control.
You know, I noticed something about you, and as we prepare for the, you use your hands, and it's difficult in virtual settings. What advice would you give us, whether we deliver a talk or a speech in auditorium or virtually? How we use our body, our hands, our eyes.
And it's very different, Haitham, as you've mentioned, the difference between virtual versus in person with our gestures is very different. First, where we look in a virtual setting, I'm looking directly at the camera lens the entire time. I may pause to look down at your expression, but I come back to the camera lens in order to make you feel like I'm speaking to you. In a larger setting, I practice what I call eye connection, where I choose one person and speak to them for a phrase. And then I'll turn to someone else and I'll speak to them for a phrase. And if it's a large auditorium, I'll choose someone. I can't even see them. The lights are in my eyes, but I imagine that they're there. And that pacing makes me feel more intentional. It slows me down and makes me more present. Now, with gestures, in a virtual setting, I recommend if people are presenting that they stand up. I happen not to be doing it today, but usually I'm standing up and I want to make sure my head and upper torso are in the frame so that I can gesture and use my hands naturally, as opposed to forcing myself to sit on my hands. Because when I do that, the energy it takes me to fight my natural body language reduces the energy in my voice. So I want to free my hands, which frees my energy as well. But I want to make sure that you can see those hands as opposed to just, fingertips sticking up out of the screen. So it's recognizing how people can see us. On a large stage, I'll have a little bit of space between my elbow and my side and my rib cage so that I can gesture naturally without keeping my hands too tight at my sides. And when I walk, I want to be cognizant that I'm walking during transitions, and then I pause and make eye connection to make a point. And then I can walk during, so how did we get here? I'll walk during that rhetorical question, and then I'll pause and look in the audience and say, here's what I want you to take away from this. All of this is practiced. It might look natural when I do it. That's because I've been doing this professionally for 22 years. So it has become natural, but I worked very, very hard to become this way. And I'm not done. I'm working with speech coaches myself who are helping me improve my skills as a speaker in terms of my messaging and my delivery. So we're never done with these skills. We're always learning and growing.
And is there a specific color that presenters, those who give talk or speech that you think would make us more comfortable? Like I heard some from someone like navy or black or gray would make you more connecting to the audience. Do you have any advice on this?
That's a great question. And this is the perfect setting to ask that question, because what you wear depends on the setup of the room. So if I'm speaking on stage, one of the questions I always ask the meeting professionals is, what's the color of the backdrop? Because if I'm wearing a navy suit and the backdrop is navy, then I'm just going to blend in. I knew we're all using red backgrounds. I have a jacket just like this that's red. I did not wear it because if I did, again, I would blend in. So the color that you wear should take into account what's behind you so that you make sure you can still stand out. Whether you feel comfortable or not, that depends on you psychologically. How do you feel about these specific colors? So it's really whatever works for you that makes you feel comfortable, that makes you feel confident, and makes you feel like you're not distracted by what you're wearing, whether it's uncomfortable shoes or the color of your clothing. I know if I'm speaking on a panel, and when you speak on a panel, you're seated, but you're usually raised up from the audience. So if I'm going to speak on a panel and I'm wearing a dress, I want it to be a long dress so that I can be comfortable. Or maybe I'm wearing pants instead, so I don't have to worry about the skirt being too short. So I'm intentional about my attire based on, and it goes back to strategic authenticity. What's authentic and comfortable to me, and what's effective in this situation, given the backdrop, the audience, and the chair. That's how I approach it.
We have another question from the audience on what advice would you give to someone who's preparing for a job interview or any other type of speech about him, herself, in which the person does not know what questions will be asked?
I believe in a job interview, you can estimate at least 50% of the questions you're going to get. And one of the tools I like to recommend, I'm going to write this in the chat, is called Udly.ai. You can role play the job interview and you can choose the type of questions you're going to get. If it's a behavioral interview, which they do a lot in the consulting field, is it a warm, friendly interview? Is it a mean or aggressive interview? You can choose that, and Udly uses AI to role play those interviews, and then you can watch it later. You can watch the recording of your interview, and it gives you feedback on how well you did. So I like to use Udly for preparing for those kinds of situations. And then I like to prepare my answers to questions in advance. And many of you know the SOAR or STAR technique for answering questions during an interview. What was the situation? What was the obstacle? What action did you take? And what was the result that happened? So I like to think in advance, and I start with, who's my audience? What's my goal? And why me? Why do I care? Then I identify the questions I think they're going to ask. And then I identify how I would answer those questions using SOAR or STAR. And then I have bullet points ready for the interview. So that's how I approach it, very thoughtfully.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're almost like 5 minutes to the closing of the
and let me
event.
also say, because Karen put in the chat, for those who would like to stay in touch with me, I send out weekly emails on leadership, communication, and AI and authenticity. And Karen put a link in the chat. It says, keep in touch with Allison. You can click on that link and sign up for that. And then she also put in a link to the new book, which is available for pre-order as well. And I would love to hear people's comments on that because it's such an important issue for us all to confront and address as a global society. And I hope everyone learns about it.
Yeah, Alison, thank you so much. It was a sincere pleasure to engage in this dynamic conversation with you. I'm sure our audiences will take away something special today. And thank you so much for our members all over the world. Have a wonderful week ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Great to see so many people joining us. Thanks, everyone, for being here. It was a great conversation. Hope to continue the conversation online. And Karen, can you put that link in the chat again, those 2 links again for people who missed them?
Yes, I was just about to do that. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
And we will share the recording as well.
Wonderful, so people will have the recording to go back to. Great, so you have those links in the chat. Berta, you have them, and Miriam and Jess, good to see you. Great. Thanks,
Are there
everyone.
any other questions from the audience before we end the meeting formally? If anyone didn't get a chance to ask and wants to raise it while we still have Allison with us. Okay, guess you were very, very clear.
Okay, okay, great, great.
Wonderful.
All right, thanks, everyone. Thanks for
Thank
including
you so
me.
much, Allison.
Hope to see you
Thanks,
at Harvard
Haitam.
sometime
Thank you
on
so much.
campus. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Karen.
I had a question, but I think it's too late now. I wanted to ask Mrs. Allison about any tips that she has when it comes to managing difficult relationship with colleagues at work.
She's actually coming back in, so just hold it for 1 second. I think she heard
Yeah,
that you
she's
were
with
trying
us.
to
Yeah.
ask. So Allison is back with us.
I saw a raised hand by Berta just
Yeah.
after I jumped off, so I jumped back on.
Okay, so
Hi
yeah.
there. Hi, Allison. Thank you so much for the insightful tips that you gave for us today. I have one question. So, what are your tips on managing difficult relationships with colleagues?
I'm gonna
Because
just give me 1 second. I'll start the recording again, even though we missed the question. So if you could repeat the question, and then I'll restart, continue the recording so it's on the recording right now.
Okay. So, what are your tips on managing difficult relationships with colleagues who are sometimes toxic at work? Do you think it would be like, because we need to find balance when it comes to managing these relationships with them? We don't want like to have a straightforward approach because this would sound demanding to them or kind of like you are very aggressive, but still we don't want to have like a very close to self approach, like keeping stuff close to yourself, not talking. Like, what's your advice on this?
It's such an important question and a really difficult situation because as at the Kennedy School, we say the most common answer is it depends. It really depends on the individuals. It depends on your relationship in terms of organizational status. So a difficult relationship with someone who's in your organization at your level versus above or below, or in a different division. Do you work together? Do you not? Did they used to be colleagues and now you manage them? So there's a lot of complexity there, and it's depending on who they are and what motivates them. So I try to look at this as information gathering about that person overall. And I think if I have a conflict with Haitham, then I'm going to think about who do I know who really, we don't have a conflict, just so you know. But if I'm going to think, who do I know who really knows Haitham, who really understands Haitham, maybe is close to him or worked with him in the past. And I'm going to go to that person and say, hey, I've been experiencing some challenges in working with Haitham. I'd like to address that, but I also want to do it in a way that works for him. Can you help me understand what might be effective, or what should I know? And then that helps me think about how to strategically approach Haitham. And when I talk to Haitham, I may look at this as, here's a challenge I think we can address together. And I think about my negotiations class with Professor Brian Mandel. It wasn't me against you. It was the two of us against the problem. So can we externalize the problem so that together we're going to collaboratively solve it? Now, for different people, it works in different ways. It could be simplistic for some people, but it could be valid for others. What do you think about that, Berta?
That's such an insightful tip. And thank you so much about that. I really think it also depends on the workplace culture. Here, I'm in Albania right now, and it's very like different from the US working culture here. Like sometimes people like here like to gossip a lot. They don't like to straightly solve the problem. They just want to attack each other personally. You get my point? And even if I, for example, let's say that I apply this tip, it will turn like the other colleague might say to me, oh, she's this way, she's always this way, don't mind her. They might mislead me and not, instead of leading me to a solution. I think it really depends on the workplace culture, but that's a very good tip. That's a very good tip, and I'm going to share it with my colleagues when I come back to work tomorrow.
Try. Well, it's also, if you can think about approaching that colleague and saying, and thinking about what's at stake for the organization if you don't address the challenge. So you can say to that colleague, there's this challenge that we're facing together that I think until we figure this out, we're not, here's what's at stake if we don't figure it out. And then again, you're making it more collaborative, but it doesn't work in every situation. And sometimes the realization is this is not the right environment. You know, if you can't change the entire culture, then maybe it's not the right culture to be in. And I mean culture, not of a country, but of an organization.
Yes, you're totally right. Like the tip that you gave is like the best that we can do in this environment. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right, so with that, we will officially wrap. And the recording will be available after this presentation. So either reach out to us if you don't get it in our newsletter, or if you don't receive it in any other means on social media through our Hackney platforms. Thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Great to
Thank
be
you
with
so
you.
much. Thank
Everyone.
you.